Namaste, Sat Shri Akal, Adab everybody. If you can listen to me, yes, okay. So we are live on YouTube. Namaste everybody, Namaskar. Storytelling Education and Arts India Council, SEAC. We are welcoming you, me, Priyanka Chatterjee. I have my colleague, Yogita Bansal Ahuja with me, and Seema Wahi Mukherjee. And SEAC was envisioned as a pan-India collective to celebrate the rich cultural heritage of story and storytelling in India and beyond. Hence, today, 18th April, is an important day for all of us here. 18th April is the International Day of Monuments and Sites. This year, on the occasion of 39th World Heritage Day, SEAC presents a day-long virtual conference on complex, past, diverse futures, which has been the theme as declared by ICOMOS for this particular year. And this is going to be just the beginning of our ongoing series, which is called MOM, Memoirs of Monuments, Hamari Kahani, Hamari Dharopar, where we deep dive into the collective memory of monuments as PEST, Pace Landscape. PACE stands for Political, Economic, Socio-Cultural, and Technological Landscape.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
In MOM, we invite Sanjay K. Roy, who is an entrepreneur of the arts and is the managing director of Teamworks Arts, which produces over 25 highly acclaimed performing arts, visual arts, and literary festivals across 40 cities in the countries, such as Australia, Canada, Egypt, France, Germany, Hong Kong, Italy, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, UK, and USA, including the world's largest free literary gathering, the annual Zee Jaipur Literature Festival. Roy has received the National Award for Excellence and Best Director for the film Shahjahanabad, The Twilight Years. He is a founder trustee of Salam Balak Trust, SBT, working to provide support services for street and working children in the inner city of Delhi, where over 55,000 children have benefited from education, training, and residential services. In 2011, the White House presented SBT, the US President's Committee of Arts and Humanities Award, for an international organization.
Roy works closely with various industry bodies on important policy issues within the cultural space in India, and he is a senior office bearer on several committees working on policy infrastructure for the creative industries. He is the co-chair of the Art and Culture Committee of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, popularly known as FICCI, and former president of Event and Entertainment Management Association, IMA. Today, Sanjay K. Roy is going to talk about connection of arts with monuments of India. We are elated to have you here, Mr. Roy, with us, and we welcome you to take the virtual stage. Welcome to SEAC.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, Yogita, Seema. I'd really like to congratulate the Storytelling Education and Arts India Council, SEAC, on the occasion of World Heritage Day for putting this together. I think you are one of the few people who realize the importance of heritage and the need to celebrate it. Most of us in India are so immune to our own history that our only association with our built heritage is either to put a poster of an election campaign or maybe occasionally to urinate against the walls of an ancient building. Unfortunately, that's true. And perhaps one of the reasons is that we have so much of history. Every corner, every street, every part of India, every village, every town has some resemblance or some semblance of an ancient monument around the next corner. And this, perhaps this issue of plenty has become one of our great problems. In many countries which doesn't have the kind of history and built heritage that we have, whatever little that they have, they celebrate with incredible joy. I mean, I remember I was in Canada when the Canadian National Library burned down about 10 years ago, a decade ago, and the librarian was distraught. And he said, "You don't understand what this means to us. This is 50 years of our history that we've been able to record has burned down. I know there's no comparison to your ancient history, but for us, that's all we have recorded." And similarly, when I was in America, at one point, I'd gone to see an ancient site and there was some bricks and everybody was making a big hoo-ha and there was a visitor center and so on and so forth. And when you actually came to the monument, it was, an aggregation of a few bricks, and people were absolutely astonished. And then I keep thinking of what we have here in India, and of course what there is in Australia, in the Uluru Caves, or what there is in Egypt and Turkey and Israel. And that's always fascinating. I'm going to start by asking the simple question, because I know much of this hopefully is going to be seen by young people. So why is heritage, that many of you think is boring, important? And the reason why it's important is that it represents a collective history. It represents in time issues that involve design and architecture and what you wore and the kind of hairstyles you sported. And much of you will be surprised to know, and next time you go to Khajuraho, the temple complex, please go looking around every one of the monuments and try and find there's one woman who's sporting a handbag, pretty much a Gucci or a Calvin Klein kind of handbag, but a handbag all the same. And that was 1,020 years ago. They had handbags. So it gives you a perspective. In today's world, where we're always moving, we are migrating from one place to the other, we're forgetting that our ancient roots were in that village or that native land to which we belonged, from where our names came from. If you said a name in South India, you would, in most cases, the traditional name would indicate your father's name, your village name, your district name, your family name, and of course would refer to your caste. Now, of course, many of our great-grandparents, or certainly my great-grandfather, was educated in America, ran away actually from his zamindari in Bengal and ran away, went to Japan, hated the food, went on to Canada, then went on to set up the Ghadar Party in the United States, then studied in Oxford and came back home. For him, he dropped his caste name and his village name and his title, and it became Roy as opposed to Sen Sharma, Roy Chaudhary. But in many ways, that was that time. It was the revolution of trying to find and seek new identity. We were a new country. We were trying to win independence. We were trying to overthrow our colonial masters. We wanted our own history. Today, 75 years into India's independence, we're seeing this resurgence. We're seeing new writings coming out from our point of view. So far, our histories and our monuments were interpreted from the West. When the West first chanced upon Khajuraho, the then ASI Director General, who arrived at the site, said that this was a sinful monument, a monument to sin. And they said it must be covered up and hidden from sight. And it showed the depravity of the Indian people, not realizing that what they saw, or the tantric symbols that you saw, were in many ways a sense of what was our history and philosophy. India is not just about A kind of architecture or B kind of architecture. And of course, it's separated by the Cholas and all of the periods of history that we know, the Mughals and so on and so forth. But it also represents our philosophy. It also represents our living heritage and history. And that's why it's important. Today, how do you represent that? If you go to the Chidambaram temple in Tamil Nadu, or if you go to Konark in Puri, or you go to see the Lingaraj temple in Bhubaneswar, these have living variations today in the dance forms of Bharatnatyam and Odissi, which come alive and are mostly attributable to the friezes on the walls of the temple in Chidambaram or in Konarak and Puri. Similarly, if you look at the Chola bronzes, and the first time that I encountered the Chola bronzes was not in India, it was actually in the UK at the Royal Society of the Arts, where you had to queue around the block 4 times to be able to come to see 26 of the Chola bronzes, which ran for 6 months. And then when I went to Chennai, where the home of the Chola bronzes were, in this old dusty museum, um, I had to get somebody to come on their cycle and open the locks to the Chola Bronze Museum, covered completely with dust and uncelebrated. There stood the most magnificent bronze sculptures of our times. Even today, some of that is practiced in this one village at the bend of the river of Kaveri down south, where they still use the same methods to create the Chola bronzes. Perhaps they've lost the skill set in the same way that the Jamdani weavers of Bengal, now Bangladesh, lost their skill set of weaving the purest textile. But all of this again is reflected in our built heritage. Today, when you travel north to south, east to west, across the northeast, you come across those most magnificent temples telling you the stories and mapping the places where perhaps Ram and Sita went, or Hanuman was born, or Krishna could have been born, or temples to Hidimba, the incredible Rakshasa who is worshipped across the mountain areas. Each of these, again, are representative of those times, of those living traditions. Why do people look at Hindu philosophy and our tradition so differently? It's because it is the only ancient philosophy of them all that continues to exist across millennia, in the same way perhaps that it was practiced then. Even today, the Rig Veda's chants are heard in the same way that they were heard 3,000 or 4,000 years ago when they started first being assimilated. Remember, at that point of time, the Rig Vedas had no intentions of creating the temples that we see today of built heritage. They don't advocate temple building at all. They say if you have to look to God, you have to look within. It's in the scriptures, and God exists all around you. The temple traditions came much later, 2,000 years later. But even as kings and queens started creating these incredible monuments to celebrate often victory against an enemy, often to show how powerful they were, often as even our politicians do today, to distract from famines or greater troubles in the empire, building these incredible monuments to that kind of time and their god of the day. We saw the way that the architecture changed, design changed. We looked at the way sandstone was used, the way stone was cut. Even if you look at Stonehenge, the story of Stonehenge today, I mean, they've just finally realized the quarry from where those Stonehenge stones were quarried from and why they were carried from place A to place B. Absolutely fascinating. Look at Hampi, for example. Look at Golconda, the fort of Golconda, where when you stand at the gate at the bottom in the arch and you clap, you can hear it on the top of the hill in the chambers of the then king. Similarly, in Orissa, there's a research that's recently been done about the 3rd century amphitheater, which is seen to have the most perfect acoustics ever created by man. If you look at our temple structures of the Grabgriha and the outside building, a place where the mantras were chanted or performances were done, the acoustics are perfect. The temple tradition, as you see today, and if you read any of the great books on the temple traditions, you'll see not only did it follow the Vastu of the time to ensure the sun, the alignment with the sun and the moon and the stars, But it also looked at seasons, it looked at the wind, it looked at the shifting way that the natural calamities and weather affected a monument in one way or the other. So why should we preserve any of our monuments? Why is it important to keep the Taj Mahal pristine? Why is it important to survive, make sure the Lodi tombs or our temples of Khajuraho or the great Chhatris and Orcha or Bikaner or the forts of Jodhpur? Why is it important to maintain them? Because it's history, because it tells us of the past and it warns us of past follies. Today, even as we are struggling with COVID, if only we had looked at the papers of the Sassoon dock in Mumbai, where the first plague arrived and the first Spanish flu landed, we would have been much wiser in terms of how to tackle this pandemic. Sadly, none of us learn from history. Not we as individuals, certainly not our political class, nor our bureaucratic class. Why? Because people very rarely read. And in many ways, because you don't read, perhaps it's even more important to look to the monuments of our times and see what happened. What is it that they represented at that moment of time in the continuum of the world? Remember, in either the Hindu or the Buddhist philosophies, this is but just a pulse. We are here, but just for a fraction of a second in the way that the millennia is construed. But even as you look to the Bhimbetka caves in Madhya Pradesh, or you go to Chhattisgarh, or you go far back to Uluru in Australia and see the cave drawings of 30,000 and 40,000 years ago, you will see the progression of art. You will see the way colors has been used. You will see the way hunting scenes came alive. You will see the way how elders gathered around the fire. If you look at the worldly paintings of today, or gone, but in this case, I'll start with worldly. What is it that you see? There are two distinct paintings that I'll talk about. One is the painting where the goddess fertilizes or plants the seeds. And what is the story there? From each seed, and I think it was 14 or 18, 16 seeds that created the universe. The first was created the insect. The second was created reptilian life, and so on and so forth. Man was created 12th or 13th in that form. Similarly, if you look at the worldly paintings of weddings, one of the ceremonies that they have, and you're looking at the worldly paintings that have come down millennia through millennia, generation after generation, eked upon the walls of time. You'll see a painting which has these three women who are the priests of this particular wedding occasion, where they pray and they invite the gods to come to the wedding. Well, why is it so unusual that it's three women priests? They were the widows of the village. That's what was exciting. So look at what it was before and look at what it is today. Again, you will see the empowered woman coming through the Chauset Yogini temples, for example, and there's one that still exists in Khajuraho, not often seeked out because it's in the forest past the Shiv Sagar. But if any of you ever go look it up. The Chauset Yogini temples, those were the principal temples in which prayers were held and the tantrics managed the state of affairs and beings. And those were the centers of power. It's only much later did the center of power shift from the woman to the man. And it's really in the Manusmriti later that got codified and it's become what it is today that many of the women today fight against. So why is that again important? It shows that we were an evolved philosophy. We had an evolved way of life. We had an evolution of our storytelling traditions. We had an evolution of our great kings and queens. Even if you look to Akbar's time, the women of his court, of Akbar's court, rode together with Akbar. They traveled all across, and it's the Janana that controlled much of the empire. It's the politics of the Janana, which is the reason the architecture of the Janana is created in a particular way. One day, in a Rajput household, I think it was in Udaipur or Dighi, maybe it was in Dighi, when one of the princes, tried to disguise himself as a woman, crossed the courtyard seeking out his latest wife. His grandmother sitting in one of the chhatris, and he couldn't see her because of the way it was designed. The jananas were designed through the jalis. Called out to him, said, "Why are you coming chori chipke? If you're a man, then reveal yourself and come as a man. You're not coming to steal anything. This is yours." So architecture really is at the center of all of this. The design of our forts and palaces. If you go to a fort, or if you go to any homes across the length and breadth of the border towns or what used to be the greater India, you'll see every home has a really low door, which you have to bend to step through. So why? It's because you couldn't run in with an unsheathed sword. You had to come in like that. Absolutely fascinating. If you look at the way the Amer forts or the Junagadh forts have been created, it's been created to ward off any kind of invasion. And these creations are not just at that point of time. It's an evolution of design form of the forts and palace technique. And you can see that across Maharashtra and the Maratha land. Shivaji and his forces were past masters at building the most brilliant forts, choosing the most incredible places. It was later, when danger passed and India started assimilating with Western ideas and started becoming and befriending the powers that be, that they started moving from their forts to their palaces. The pink city of Jaipur, for example, is said to have the same blueprint as the new town of Edinburgh. Some say, in fact, that the plans were swapped. There's another theory that the plans of the Red Fort, where you see these tall barracks, was swapped with another barracks in the UK. So you have these ugly barracks in the middle of Red Fort. But again, why is that? Because it notified and denoted power, most importantly. Why are the mandirs built on the top of the steepest hills? Because it's from there that you can see everything around you. When the British invaded or conquered Red Fort, when the British troops marched into Delhi and massacred everybody and took over the city and took over India, India passed to the British Crown in 1857. Before that, it was primarily ruled not by the British Crown, but by the East India Company, a corporation. Of course, its present day avatars are Google and Facebook and so on and so forth. But when they took over Red Fort, what is it that they did? It had earlier been decided that the railway line would stop in the east of the city across the Yamuna. And that's when people approaching the city of Delhi would cross the river and see the resplendent Red Fort with all of its minarets covered in gold. The British decided to change that, and they broke through the wall of the Red Fort. So if you go drive where you drive under the bridges of the Red Fort, around Salimgarh Fort, as you're going towards the burning ghats, on the Nikambodh burning ghats or onto Tisazari, you'll see the way they cut the wall of the Red Fort to bring the railway line in. The famous steam engine of the British Empire, to show and denote power. Nothing much has changed. I mean, the Saharas used to run the Sahara Airlines, not because they made money of Sahara Airlines. They made money from the rupee, every rupee that they gained in their chit fund projects across the length and breadth of Uttar Pradesh. They wanted them to look up in the sky and see a Sahara plane, a symbol of power. Power changes. Cities are built and cities are destroyed. Even as they built the city of New Delhi, which was inaugurated in the 1930s, little did the British know that in a very short period of time of 16 or 17 years, they too would have to leave and catch the ship home. Even as we redesign the central vista of Delhi, what we forget is that we too are only occupants of this earth for a particular period of time, not more, lot less. And therefore our responsibility is not necessarily to keep building new monuments that are reflective of the power of the time. What is important is to look at our environment, to look around us, to preserve and conserve our history for generations to come. And this is a responsibility not just of the government or a city, it's the responsibility of each and every one of us. As young people, tomorrow when you're walking the street or crossing the street, remember the land and the earth that you walk on, the same land and earth on which dinosaurs roamed so many millennia ago. What we now see as the Himalayan range used to be sandy beaches on which these dinosaurs walked. Every time you see a road being built and hills being broken or rocks being broken, walk across there and look, and invariably you will find an identification from a Paleolithic age of the past. So tread gently, because every step you take, you are treading on someone's dreams, on somebody's aspirations, on the imagination of the other. And remember today that the arts is what anchors us. It's the arts that creates empathy. It gives us and presents an opportunity to understand somebody else's philosophy, history, way of life, being, and it pushes back on the fear of the unknown, the fear of the migrant, the fear of the Northeast person coming into this part, the fear of the Bengali or the Bihari or the South Indian migrating someplace. The arts allows us to assimilate, it allows us to celebrate, it allows us to empathize, and it allows us to understand that there isn't just one telling of a story. For that one story, whether it's the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, there's a million versions of them. And it isn't my way or the highway where only one version is valid. All of these versions are a truth that stand side by side, and they tell of a time and they define a period. So remember, this is our collective responsibility. If you see somebody on the street posting a poster on something that's even 50 years old, it's your responsibility to ensure that that place is preserved. Because what is 50 years old today or 75 years today will be 100 years in your lifetime. That denotes history. And you must preserve in the way that Priyanka and Seema, Yogita are helping preserve stories, a story that I am telling you of our past and our present, and most importantly, pertinent to the future, to envision a better tomorrow for your kids and their kids. Collectively, we need to do this, not one or the other. So I'm going to end at that, and I'm going to ask Priyanka and Yogita and Seema if they have any questions, which I'm happy to answer. I think I've already overrun the time, but back to you, and thank you all for making this possible.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Such a beautiful talk. And after this, I'm also getting chats from my colleagues. We are sparked by a lot of questions. I would like to begin with what you ended with. That is our collective responsibility towards arts and towards this, preserving our cultural heritage. As most of us would agree that understanding the past, having reminders of the past, even just in architecture, will allow people to understand where they are and where they are headed in future. And the historical buildings, the monuments, the memorials, they can allow people to understand what happened in the past and how things could possibly play out in the future. Preserving our past, of course, it gives us more understanding and also hope for the future. So when we understand that monuments are the grappling irons that bind one generation to another, but what about the current scenario? That's where we are right now. Not talking about the COVID situation, but situation at large, where we are currently grounded. How do you think that our future generations are responding to this built heritage? And what can be the role of art in celebrating our tangible heritage in a better way?
Let me answer your question in a slightly different way. You know, the problem that we have today is education and the way that we are still looking to schools and universities and colleges to educate people in a particular way. Today, a kid is still asked to memorize 2 into 2 is equal to 4, and 4 into 4 is equal to 16, and etc. Even as you know that your phone or the computer is going to give you the same answer and let you progress beyond that instantly. Everything that you wanted to know in terms of information, because education in the past was rote education, meaning you had to memorize it. And if you memorized it well, you got X amount of marks. And therefore, people knew that you knew your whatever you had memorized and you were promoted. It was an act of memory. You were awarding your memory. So those with people who didn't have who had what we now know as ADHD, etc., couldn't keep pace, or those on the autistic spectrum couldn't keep pace. So now if you look forward and say that, what is it that we need education for? We need education, like I said, to understand about the other, to keep away hatred, to stop being frightened of the unknown. You need education to give you, to hone your skills, to be able to innovate, to be able to look beyond. This divide that education in the last 2 centuries, 3 centuries has created, which is a divide between the liberal arts and sciences, is a fallacy. I mean, Michelangelo and so on and so forth didn't do this. Oh, I'm going to take the arts and therefore I don't know the sciences. Today you need both. If 2004 Space Odyssey hadn't been written, would there have been people who decided, hey, how do we get to space? How do we unlock space? How do we become curious about what is around us? How do we know what happens when an unseen microbe like COVID takes over our lives? We continue to fund nuclear and conventional missiles because they are as physical aspects. But we don't do the same kind of funding or inquiry into the unknown. Otherwise, the pandemics that we are seeing religiously would long have been addressed. So coming back to your question, therefore, is what is the need of the moment? Education. What does education have to do? Is to inculcate the joy of learning. Not that it's a chore. Oh my God, I've got online class today. I'm going to kill myself or kill my teacher or kill my parent. No, you should have the joy of learning, where a hint is given. Hey guys, this is what happened today. And did you know the water, this glacier, they've said, is going to be retreating. This is what they said 200 years ago. Let's see what's happened. Give them that inquiry, because Google and Auntie Siri is your teacher. There's no going back. So let's use that to our advantage. There's also no point seeking admission or a certificate from the WhatsApp school of learning. So actually, what you need to do is try and get people that sensibility of trying to understand what is real, or what is the truth, and what is scientific discovery, as opposed to hearsay and WhatsApp knowledge. That is what is important. And the minute you start doing that, and you say, so why was the Golconda Fort built where it was? Why was Fatehpur Sikri built where it was? Why was the Agra Fort built in the way that it was? Why in the Edinburgh do the houses go down 7 stories? When the Qutub was being built, how did they manage to put those bricks together? Today, you don't even know how they managed to put together the great stones of the pyramids in Egypt. So there's so much to learn. And there's so much to learn also in terms of destruction. How did the river turn away? Why did the Mohenjo-daro civilization cease to exist suddenly? Was it sudden? Was it a gradual process of, in those days, their equivalent of climate change? Did the rivers, were there floods? Was there invasions? If there were invasions, how did it happen? Did the Aryans really come? Are the dholes from Madhya Pradesh the similar DNA to the dingoes in Australia? If so, 20,000 years ago, how did these dholes and how did people in the Great Migration through India get to Australia? These are the questions that should need to be asked. And today, because of scientific studies and because of technology and the supercomputers that we have, we're being able to see where India was 300 billion years ago, stuck up with the Antarctic in a cold, frigid zone, then separated and went down, then made its way from where the Antarctic is up past Africa, even as the island of what's it called next to Africa got separated, stayed with the African continent. We then passed over all of the volcanoes, at which point of time the Western Ghats were created, because as the Indian shelf passed over the volcanoes erupted, and it created this incredible lifting of the Western Ghats. And then finally, the Indian subcontinental plain on which dinosaurs roamed. And there were beaches and great green life, the vegetation, ginormous vegetation, came and hit the Eurasian plate. Let's ask them to talk about that or discover that. And that's when, in that process of discovery, as you throw through the continuum of time, you can then look at, so how was the Angkor Wat built? How was Ajanta and Ellora created? What was the techniques that they had building downwards? How did they get their dimensions so proper, even as they were building down or digging down, or in this case, sculpting rock down? Fascinating, right? How was Hemis created? One room on top of another, all in this higgledy-piggledy way, but still standing. I mean, it's amazing. I can carry on forever. I mean, when I go to any historic site, for me, it's just not just, oh, wow, okay, I've come to the Taj Mahal, let's have a selfie. Or I've come to Khajuraho, let's have a selfie, or whatever. Let's now go and have lunch in the best restaurant. No, it's about discovering what it is that's so special. How did the engraving happen? Where did the rubies come from? Where did the precious stones come from in the engraving? Absolutely fascinating. What is the connection between Topkapi in Istanbul and much of the heritage of the Mughal period that we know in India? What is the relationship? What's the relationship between language? Why is that in Hungarian you have 900 odd words of Sanskrit? You know, I mean, all of this is why we need to be cognizant of our history and what is in our backyard. Not just about tourism. This is not about tourism. I just wanted to make that clear. This is not, here's a beautiful monument to go to on your honeymoon. It's not about tourism. It's about the very evolution of our being. It's the sum total of who we are. It's the architecture and the design and the color and the tradition and the food we eat and the way we soak raisins and the way we make a payasam in the south or payesh in the east. It's all of that. It's not one or the other. It's a collective. It's a collective memory which only stories can preserve and transmit generation through generation. Long-winded answer, sorry.
Thank you so much. And Seema, if you can please unmute yourself.
It was actually mesmerizing to listen to what you call your long-winded answer. And you actually transported us into the times when Indian subcontinent would have broken and traveled. And it is so amazing even, to kind of awe-inspiring to even imagine how we all have come into being and have evolved collectively.
Seema, do you know that we're actually all catfish? Our ancestors were catfish because the catfish could exist on land and water. And we have arrived from the catfish. I mean, the closest prehistoric thing is catfish. I mean, read this book, Indica by Pranay Lal. It'll give you the geological history and evolution of, I would recommend it for every kid. Any one of you who loves to know where you are today, read Indica. You can order it online. Pranay Lal. Absolutely fascinating.
Definitely. I'm going to order my copy today itself. Indica by Pranay Lal.
By Pranay Lal,
everyone. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that. You mentioned in your talk that there is a difference between how we view monuments and how we treat monuments in our country and abroad. Possibly it's because of, we have a lot more ancient monuments here in our country, and they are, like you said, at every place. And it is very different in Canada, which you experienced when burning of a library which was just 50 years old, and they were actually remorseful that they have lost a piece of their heritage. Yeah, their everything. So my question is now related to arts, like since the festival with Teamworks has been across in different countries now, and how is the treatment of arts, visual or performing, different in our country and there?
So Seema, I think because all 1.3 billion of us Indians sing, tell a story from cradle to grave, we're part of the arts, right? When somebody is born, you sing, irrespective of how poor or rich you are. We take the arts for granted. It's one of those rare traditions where we have the traditional forms, the classical forms, and the contemporary forms that coexist. It's also one of those rare countries where none of this continues to exist because of subsidy or because of support. I mean, today, if you look at the great philharmonics or the great ballets or the Chinese puppet tradition or the opera tradition, all of this exists because there's subsidy or there's support. Today, across the world, not just in India, young people want to learn their Bharatnatyam. They want to learn their classical violin. They want to learn their Carnatic tradition. They want to learn Kathak. Good, bad, or ugly is irrelevant. They just want. There's a desire to learn that. The world over, there's a desire to learn yoga because it's a qualified system of healing. Again, forget the fact that everybody who comes to a yoga ashram for 3 weeks thinks that they can now become a yoga teacher and go off and teach yoga. Forget that. It's this continuous evolution, despite the Star TVs and the OTT platforms and the ZTVs and so on and so forth, that our traditional arts continues to evolve. It's the very system. If you look at our raga system or our raga tradition, it's not like Western orchestra, which is written. So whatever Beethoven wrote or Mozart wrote, you can interpret it. You can get the string section to perform more aggressively or louder. You can get the bass section to perform down, but you still perform it in the written context. You can't take a note out from here or there. In our raga tradition, in the meters of the raga, you can experiment within the raga. So it's continuously evolving, and because it's continuously evolving and being reinterpreted, the same dohas of Kabir, for example, 16th century, 14th century poet, will continue today to be played by the Kabir cafes of the world in a rock tradition, for example. An Indian Ocean will pick up ancient Aramaic songs from 2000 years ago and reinterpret them. And therein also lies the problem. Even as every street corner will celebrate the Ramayana or the Ram Leela in the north of India, and everybody in the south will paint a kolam, of course, today with paint as opposed to with rice flour, they forget why. Why was it that they did it with rice flour? Why? Because rice flour and sugar were mixed in a paste and laid on the floor so that the smaller creatures, the ants and the other creatures, could come and also feast at the same time. It was a giving back to the land. So it's not that they didn't have access to painting. So you have to understand the evolution of our art forms. And in that understanding of the evolution of the art forms, all of us think that we are Mr. Modi, we know it all. And because we know it all, we don't think there's anything to be learned or anything that's special. And because there's nothing special, the arts has no value in India. Everybody will tell a performer, a musician or an artist or a magician or whatever, they'll say, आप हमारे लिए कर दीजिए, हम आपको platform दे रहे हैं. Platform दे रहे हैं? Meaning you're doing a favor to the artist by platform दे रहे हैं? Because there's no value. Because it all comes to us free. All of us are so part of the arts that we don't give another artist that kind of value that they do in the West. And therein lies the huge difference. In the West, anybody and everybody will pay for great content or great artistry. Here we don't. Here we'll call, अच्छा आपके पास पास है, किसके पास पास है, अच्छा वो उसके पास पास होगा, पास मंगवा दीजिए. क्यों पास मंगवा दीजिए? Does the artist not have a stomach to feed? Does he or she not have kids to send to school? Does he or she not want a holiday? Does he or she not have to pay his or her accompanies? Do they not have to buy their instruments and continue to perform? How can any of this happen if there is no value? In the earlier days, if you were learning Bharatnatyam, even after 14 years, you would be hesitant to ask your guru ki, am I ready for my Arangetram? Today, after 3 classes a week into 3 years, most people, like it's Maggie Noodles, will set up an Arangetram where they will pay and spend 16 lakhs or 26 lakhs. Ask the same person to pay to see their guru performing. Zero batta zero. So we have no value of our ancient or our classical or our contemporary traditions because all of us are talented. So all of us think that, अरे बाबा मैं भी कर सकता हूँ ना, मैंने तो वो ऋतिक रोशन को देख लिया ऐसे करते हुए, मैं बस गाना सुन लूँगा, मैं भी कर दूंगा. So we are all also entertainers. So So our relationship with the arts is different. And because it's different, it's even more important to be able to award and distinguish between excellence and a hobby. And excellence has to be supported. And to support excellence, you have to also support failure. Excellence can only come if you have failed, not once, not twice, not thrice. For that book that you haven't been able to publish, you've written 5 books. For that poem that you think is perfect, but nobody is published, write 5,000. Excellence comes out of failure. Failure needs to be funded. Experimentation needs to be funded. From experimentation will you have the great unicorns of the future. Innovation will come only through the arts and an understanding of the arts. Innovation won't come because you've invested X zillion of dollars into your son's latest business venture.
Priyanka, is it stuck?
Yes, he's over.
I think he'll be back.
It's okay, he'll be back. It happens at times.
I thought it was my connection.
Can you all hear?
Yes.
Yes. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I don't know at which bit of my impassioned bhashan I got broken. Anyway.
You said excellence needs to be funded.
What about
And
excellence?
failure
Excellence needs to be funded. And excellence the thinking process for us. Why is it that the arts are important? It allows you to innovate. It allows you to look beyond what you're doing. That's why it's important.
Okay. So, Sanjoy, first and foremost, thank you very much for this. You call it bhashan, but I think, what you've picked up is something very, very relevant. Both, your initial, speech and later on the response to Priyanka's question and further Seema's question. It actually, from the first response, I take the word education, which is very, very important, and how we need to relook at the way we are educating our younger generations. From what you said to Seema, it's about excellence, and it is about going back to arts and creating a connection so that we can innovate for the future. Now, when I was listening to you, it took me back in time, and I kind of grew up in the interiors of Punjab, and at a incidentally at a place which is very, very historic, which it's a small place called Muksar, where we have the Gurudwara, and all I knew as I grew up was that this is the Gurudwara. You go whenever there is a shadi in the house, and to begin the shadi, wedding affairs, you have to visit. There's one little puja that you do there, and then you come back. Or occasionally on Baisakhi and other occasions, we used to just go and pray. And on the other side, a large part of my adolescence was spent in Rajasthan, in a place called Bikaner, and a little in Udaipur. And I remember as a young girl of 14, 15 years of age, I would, want to see what's there in the bazaar and what are these forts telling us. But from then till now, even when we go out today with our kids as well, I realize that there is not so much interest in So we go to the Junagadh Fort, and all you're waiting for is कि कब खत्म होगा, थक गए हैं. So how do you really soak in the beauty and the history of a fort like Junagadh, which is so distinctly and uniquely built? How do you soak in the history and come to terms with why this particular Gurudwara was built? So how do we going back to that word education and excellence and innovation, how do we put it all together so that we can educate our younger generation and we can create interest in our monuments, in our heritage?
So I think, Yogita, this is exactly what you three are doing and what your organization is doing. So what is it that you're doing? You're assimilating stories. So look at the Gurdwara. For example, if the Gurdwara or whoever, or your family is part of the Gurdwara, was able to assimilate these brilliant stories, and it became our tradition to tell of these stories to the next generation, like we do at night. Like we've grown up, I'm sure you all have. I certainly have grown up with ghosts and stories from my grandmothers and my aunts and so on and so forth, which sort of really allows you into a different world, into a world of devis and devtas and rakshasas and chicken licken and whoever else. And similarly, Junagadh Fort, rather than thak gaye aur kitne whatever, that's an obvious. But if you were to tell the story before getting to Junagadh Fort, or have this app available where the kid and the parents could, on their way to Junagadh Fort, tell the kids, here's the story of this battle. And do you know, in this wall, this is how, I mean, do a Lord of the Rings, do a Game of the Thrones. Or from this rampart, this is where the charge happened, and this is what happened, and they pushed back, etc. Make it exciting. The problem with us in India is that all our monuments are like, touch me not. यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं कर सकते हो, touch them not, let them fall apart, etc. We've been saying for a while, you have to bring them alive. You have to tell them the stories. You have to recreate some aspects of it, and don't do it tackily. Don't do plaster of Paris recreation of some statue rubbish that they all do, but do it in this story form. And I would urge, I'm sure you all have a program, each of these, in the opening audiovisual, which was so beautifully done, do exactly that. Ask those questions for each of the monuments that you're engaging with. And don't try and reinvent the wheel all in one go. Do it one monument at a time. Source the stories for that monument. Do an open ask. Say, who has the stories for this place or this house or that Haveli? And do you have a ghost story? And which is the last ghost you saw? That's how you create the history of that. And this is the living history. This is not the written history, which is, of course, different. But this is the way that, when a guide takes you into Taj Mahal and says, "Haath kaat diya and ye kar diya, wo kar," it's that kind of. So you have to have a purpose of both, but you have to bring the monument alive. Why is it that the Agra Fort and Babji's Jodhpur Fort are so fascinating? Because they've tried to preserve that look and the feeling of the era. Why is it that everybody going to Tower of London in London gets so fascinated going to look at the Kohinoor? Because before you get there, you see one film of the coronation. Then you see one film which is about the crown. Then you see one. Of course, nowhere do you see that Duleep Singh has given, it was stolen from Duleep Singh and how they cut it into two. Wo to nahi dikhayenge, but they still build it up. Yeah, so by the time you get to the crown, so that you're not disappointed, acha, yehi hai, itna chota, you have been built up. We don't do that. Yeah. We have no sense of recording history. We have no sense of what it is to tell a story in the way that we need to do it today. Why isn't there an app on Humpy, or why isn't there a game around, around the Junagadh? Find the Barut Khana in Junagadh game. So we have to, times have changed. As I said, when I talked about education, it's not about rote or memory education anymore. It's, in all that you all put together from what I said, I keep saying the discovery is the joy of learning and discovery. And that, it's like a kid, right? You'll tell them 30 times, aag mein haath mat dalo. But till that kid, at least for once, doesn't get his or her finger burnt, they will continue. So that is what we need. We need them to come to the self-discovery, not you or me or Priyanka or Seema, but let them find their own stories and allow them the opportunity to find that. That's what educators and people like you and people like us need to do collectively, not one or the other, all together.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Yogita. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that beautiful summing up. Because if you didn't sum up in that way, we would have definitely asked you that question. That how intangible heritage and the living traditions of India, living art, can convert a dead monument into a living monument. Because that's what is needed. And I'm sure the intangible heritage, the cultural traditions, the expressive arts, and by expressive arts, I mean both performing arts as well as visual arts, they can be definitely advocating towards celebrating the rich, tangible heritage that we have. So perhaps for the future, what we are doing and what you are doing, we need to come together as one collective and celebrate through storytelling, theater, visual art, and different things that have existed since last 3,000 years in India to make this thing once again history come alive.
I just wanted to quickly react to that. You talked about the heritage coming alive. One is, of course, the monuments. And of course, today being World Heritage Day, that is important. But I'm also talking about everything else. Next time, if you have a tamba, a thali or whatever, and your kids are looking at it, ask them to see how it was created. Or next time you're wearing a piece of jewelry, how was that created? Or the wearer wearing a piece of textile, how was that created? Why is a Maheshwari a weave different from a Banarasi weave, different from a Kota weave, different from a Tangail weave? What is the difference? What is the difference between temple saris today and the Banarasi weaves, for example? What's the difference between pottery of a particular place? Why is it that blue pottery is only so specific to Jaipur? Is it the water? Why is it? So all of that needs inquiry as well. So, and all of that collectively creates our heritage. And all of that emanates then from the building traditions of architecture and design, because remember, all of it was all together, right? The textiles, the way you dressed, everything donated, the way you painted, the great miniature paint styles of Udaipur or Bikaner or Jaipur or Kota, all different styles. Why were the Havelis of Nawalgarh and Fatehpuri so different? Why did they have these Havelis? Why did they become the painted Havelis? Because they couldn't build higher monuments than the fort of the robber barons of the time. So they built smaller places, but they decorated. The bankers or the rich Marwari families put all their money into decorating the interior. So, it's fascinating. Our history and our legacy and our diversity is fascinating. And I want to end, and I know maybe it may not be taken well, but I just wanted to end by saying that this effort today of trying to have one narrative just goes against the very essence of India's rich heritage. We are not one narrative. We were hundreds of principalities. In India today, every 100 miles, everything changes. The way you pleat your sari, the way you will crush your garlic, the way you will make your dal, the way you will tie a thing, or a way you denote that you're a widow or a married person, everything changes. The way you wear your dhoti or your lungi or your gamcha or whatever. So we're not one narrative. And by trying to get everybody to buy into one narrative and saying, Jai Bajrang Bali or Jai whoever it is, you're completely destroying in its very essence the heritage that we're talking about. And I must warn that each of us are responsible for ensuring the continuation of each of our individual family histories and traditions. Because it's by individual family histories and traditions do you then form the collective in that region, in that area, and everything continues to change. And Priyanka, you talked about how we all must work together happily. Please, happy to join hands. We have our Kahani Storytelling Festival, which is for storytelling also. We've got our theater festival, Meta, which continues every weekend. Happy to do stuff, happy to be supportive. Shout, and you will not find us wanting in supporting you.
Thank you so much. It means a lot, Sanjay, because the beautiful work you have been doing. Previously, the kings and the monarchs used to be the patrons, but right now, as you mentioned, the artists, they also have the stomach and they need to be fed. So art entrepreneurs and companies, organizations, they are going to be the patrons for a longer journey so that artists can make the living heritage, the dead heritage come alive in front of the future generation. We are talking about the future of the past. And I'm sure if we work together, all of us, we can really make sure that the past is once again alive in front of the future. Thank you so much for your beautiful talk, and we hope to see you soon once again. And stay tuned for further videos from SIAC, Monuments of India, Memoirs of Monuments, Hamari Kahani, Hamari Dharam. Thank you so much, and namaste. Namaskar.
Thank you, Storytelling, Education and Arts India Council, SIAC. Thank you.
And bye-bye. Have a very good evening.